Just want life?
Life.
Life?
Yes.
Ty will introduce you and then we'll link to you. If you need anything, just ask. Okay?
Is there a microphone?
Yes. Oh, yes.
And we'll just put this on you.
Is it going to work with a beard?
Can we just stick it on this? The text. So I'd just like to welcome Daniel. His blurb says, that one weird guy who always is late to class and doesn't talk to the people, an autistic first-person account. Thank you.
Here we go. I can't really project the way I'd like. I've got a bit of a cough lingering. 20 years ago tomorrow, a guy walked into an anthropology class at Otago University stark naked. I heard that story in a sociology lecture a few years ago, used to illustrate the point that although we should question many social norms, there are some we do need to conform to. I'd like you to hold in your mind the question, which social norms should we question in the name of accepting neurodivergence, and which ones do we need to conform to? Where's the line? How far is too far? Just put a pin in that for now. My name's Daniel Copeland, and this thing isn't scrolling. Here we go. I work for the Disabilities Office at the university over there. I take lecture notes on behalf of students who aren't able to. I get sent to lectures in all corners of the academe, which is why I was in that sociology lecture. And I'm autistic. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, as it was called back then, in 2005, 2 years after I finished uni. Sometimes lecturers say things that are not very well thought through. One economics lecturer, apologising for how dry and soulless the subject economics can be, called it an autistic way of understanding the world. I could say a lot of things about economics as a discipline, from what I've seen through the years, but these people are too much like me isn't one of them. Another time I had an introductory psychology paper. One section was a quick run-through of some common neurodiverse conditions, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and so on. And each class in that section began with a 5-minute video clip about what it was like to be someone who had that condition and the difficulties they would face. Except for the class on autism, which instead began with a video clip about what it was like to be a family member of an autistic person and the difficulties they face dealing with us, because, you know, we're such difficult people. By the way, I hope we're all familiar here with the saying, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. We all understand that labels like autistic are like areas on a map, not discrete boxes of cookie-cutted individuals. I don't need to expand on that. Okay. In general, I find it's helpful to distinguish between impairments on the one hand and disability on the other. Impairments are states of an individual's body, including their brain, what we have difficulty with that others find easy. Disability then is the way in which our impairments make it harder to participate in society. The phrase socially constructed is popular in contexts like this. But when what's impaired is precisely your ability to interact with others, that's going to directly make it harder to participate in society without any construction being involved, if you see what I mean. So I'm not good at talking, which is why I've got this all written down. Words don't string themselves into sentences in my head when people are watching me and waiting for them. So I always wonder, why do neurotypical people need constant talk just to feel accepted, with or without anything to actually talk about? I do get what some small talk is for. You want to talk about something real with someone, but you don't know if they're ready. So you start by talking about something uncontroversial, inconsequential, and you approach by steps the thing you actually want to talk about, feeling out at each step whether the other person is comfortable with you coming closer. But that's something I had to learn explicitly. I gather for neurotypical people it's instinctive. They can't explain how it works because for them it just works. No one explained it to me either because everyone expects you to understand it like they do. I learned it by reading about social behaviour in vervet monkeys. Seriously. But what if you don't have an important conversation you want to work towards? Is it okay to just sit around in the same room as each other and not talk about anything? For neurotypical people, in my experience, the answer is no. That evidently makes them feel disrespected or rejected, and I don't know why. I have what is apparently the dreadfully hostile habit of answering icebreaker questions honestly. If If someone asks me, how's things, I will usually answer, not too bad, or yeah, fine, or something like that. Apparently the non-hostile answer to a question like that is, great, fantastic, this is the best day of my life, or something like that. Most days are not the best day of my life. Most days are close to average. That's how averages work. It's called regression to the mean. It's basic statistics. Why do I have to hype everything up? One person tried to explain it to me in terms of cat behaviour. Apparently the way I talk is like a cat backing away and hissing at you, whereas the proper way would be like a cat purring and rubbing up to you, which I'm afraid didn't help in the slightest. How is being honest about how your day went like a cat backing away and hissing? I can do it when I have to, but it's draining, it's exhausting, it's not something I can do all day. Just to emphasise, that's how far I've got now, 18 years after my diagnosis. When I was a student at university, I didn't understand any of it. I didn't notice that other people didn't just go quiet and not talk to anyone when they were in groups. I thought that was just an ordinary thing to do. I didn't do great flatting. I got kicked out of one flat after a week because I didn't feel like hanging out at McDonald's with them every evening. In another one of my flatmates was actually afraid of me and would squeal and run away if she bumped into me in the hallway because I was a big guy who didn't talk. I also didn't do great on shared projects in my classes. I started out studying geology, which is a fascinating subject and I love it, but you have to go out on field trips to outdoorsy places and you have to work in teams collecting data, and when you're in a team, people expect you to talk to them whenever you're not actually working. One of my strengths is thinking outside the box, coming up with ideas that other people don't think of. But the price of that is that when people expect me to figure out what I'm supposed to do because it's obvious, it's not obvious to me because I'm not thinking the same way as other people. Have you ever thought about the verb phrase, to fit in English? Don't you find it really telling that we use exactly the same phrase to mean both to be accepted and to be the same as everyone else? That gives you some idea of what my life is like. I've had water balloons thrown at me on the street, as well as eggs and lighted cigarettes. I've heard people, after I passed by their flat, suggesting breaking glass on the footpath so I couldn't go that way anymore. Once a guy thought he could lure me like an animal by laying a wallet on the ground in my path and dragging it along with a piece of fishing line when I came by. For me, this sort of thing is life. Once after I mentioned this, I got the comment, wow, I guess some people just have mental problems. No, this is how people treat people with mental problems. Another thing I'm not good at is keeping track of time. To give you some idea, I finished writing this presentation a couple of hours ago.
Is that why we've got no PowerPoint?
I don't wear a watch because of sensory issues. I will get to my sensory issues in a bit. Before I got my first cell phone, I would sometimes find myself more than an hour out of reckoning. You can imagine how hard that makes it to get to class on time every morning. The worst, though, is when for once you are on time and then something goes wrong, or your bus is delayed or whatever, and you have an excuse for once, but no one's going to believe you because you're the guy who's always late. Some people consider lateness to be incredibly rude, and honestly, I can't blame them. I did eventually figure out a system for getting to places on time in my job, but that system depends critically on other people being on time. So if a lecturer goes over time because the lecturer is late or had too much to say, that screws everything up. This trouble with time isn't just on the minutes to hours time scale. I also have trouble on the days to weeks time scale, and that means I almost always had to get extensions for class assignments with penalties to my marks. Sometimes class tests would be held at a strict time, and if you turned up late they wouldn't let you in, and then you've missed out on the marks. Again, when I really concentrate, I can get things done in a timely fashion, but again, it's draining. It's not something I can do all day, every day, and doing that and keeping up with people's social expectations at the same time is not going to happen. So, I didn't graduate in geology. I was depressed and exhausted. Stop scrolling again. I dropped out in 1998. In 1999, I started again with a cultural anthropology degree. I was also on the Student Association executive that year, which in hindsight was a mistake. I didn't do much good as a student exec, and being an exec wasn't good for me. I did graduate in 2001, but it was with my anthropology, but it was a close call. In order to get through without burning out again, I'm afraid I had to drop a Te Reo Māori class 2/3 of the way into the semester. In hindsight, I wish I'd carried on with Te Reo Māori and dropped anthro, but that would have been 2 changes of direction, and that was a bit much. I made 2 unsuccessful attempts at getting a master's in anthro, and then I left university study for good. And then there's my sensory issues. There is a catch-22 for neurodivergent people when it comes to talking about sensitivities. If you do it often, you're just a whinger and your complaints are dismissed. If you don't do it often, well, it can't be that bad if you didn't say anything before, can it? And your complaints are dismissed. The trick is to find the middle ground where your complaints are dismissed for both reasons at once. My brain doesn't filter out distractions the way it's supposed to. Used to think I might have a hearing deficiency because I often can't hear properly what people say to me. But I often can hear things that are a long way away or very quiet that other people don't expect me to hear, including what they're saying behind my back about the weird guy who's always late and doesn't talk. What I have is an auditory processing disorder. I hear too much. I can't have a conversation in a crowded cafe because I can't distinguish the voices of the people at my table from everyone else's voices plus the music in the coffee machine. And it's not just hearing. When I have tactile sensitivities as well. When I go to a dentist, I have to tell them I need more anaesthetic than most people because it wears off too quickly. I gather that most people stop feeling what they're wearing after a few minutes. I don't. That's why I don't wear a watch. That's why I don't wear shoes. It is part of why I don't shave. And then there's clothes. Clothes are never comfortable. When it's hot, or when I'm hot, wearing clothes feels like being sewn inside a burlap sack and trapped in a slow cooker. I am wearing clothes in front of you now. That means I am right now in moderate physical discomfort. I have exactly 2 choices as to what I can do about this. One is called naturism, social nudity. The other one is called shut up complaining about it, no one cares. And that brings me back to the guy I mentioned at the beginning who came to class naked. Yes, it was me. Sociology lecture telling the story got some of the facts wrong. They said it was an archaeology lecture. In fact, it was a cultural anthro course about the human body and how it's perceived and how society interacts with it. We as a class had an online discussion about naturism in which everyone, including the lecturer, had been completely positive, cheerfully positive about it. I learned that day that however much people might talk about accepting the human body, about questioning social norms, about showing skin isn't sexual unless the person whose skin it is says so, all of that is talk. In practice, what you're going to do is you're going to be normal and you're going to fit in. I'm not actually too bad at telling how people are feeling, but I have a fairly serious blind spot for figuring out how people will feel if I take some course of action I'm considering. That means I overstep personal boundaries without realising it. I cannot do what nowadays seems to be called reading the room. Social self-humiliation of quite a high degree is inevitable. On the other hand, well, one of my strengths, I suppose, is I have an unusually good memory for facts and events. That means that social self-humiliation is permanent. These days, I basically don't have pleasant memories that don't quickly remind me of painful ones. I try not to think about my life at all, basically, but to interest myself in external subjects. But even among my shameful memories, that one in particular has haunted my mental health for 20 years. I'm autistic, I'm bisexual, and I'm a naturist. Of those 3 identities, at least in my life, naturism is beyond comparison the most marginalised. Being autistic in public, as I've told you, gets me funny looks, gets me mocked, gets me disrespected. Being a naturist on a remote beach one time has gotten the police called on me. It's gotten threats from people taking the law into their own hands. Being a naturist in public would get me arrested and probably labelled a sex offender. In social discourse, we're a joke, and our lives are relentlessly sexualised. For naturist men, that's as objects of disgust, and for naturist women, well, you can imagine. So remember the question I asked at the beginning, where's the line? How far is too far? Now, even to me now, it is crashingly obvious that education providers in the present state of society can't just declare themselves clothing optional. If I hadn't realised that, this presentation would look very different. Apart from anything else, naturist organisations have to do all kinds of background checks and security measures just to keep ourselves safe from people with inappropriate intentions. All of which is true and all of which is reasonable, but it does mean that I'm going to spend the rest of my life having to choose between isolation and constant tactile discomfort. But beyond just gathering knowledge and distributing it among the next generation, tertiary education providers in particular also have a role in helping shape and steer public attitudes. I believe there are other good reasons besides my experiences why our society needs to take a more understanding view of the human body, a view based on consent rather than on propriety and shame. Things like body image and its connection to mental health. Things like the double standard of where women have to cover up their bodies in case they distract men. I won't go further down that tangent, but there is a lot more I could say. Tertiary education providers cannot make that shift happen by themselves, but they can start the conversation, and that's not nothing.
Do you want to take questions at all? Or?
It might be difficult. I haven't planned for answers.
Thank you very much for sharing that.
There's a couple of wee comments online.
Yeah.
On behalf of sociology, I apologise to naturists everywhere. I can imagine new classes in the future, although possibly, and this is from an Auckland perspective, not anywhere too chilly unless there is heating. The heating is great. I was in Auckland on the weekend, and I can tell you it's not warm there either. Daniel, you said you're not good with words, but this is brilliant.
This is pretty black.
So, yeah, thank you very much. That concludes our day for today. We finished early, which for me is like cool.
You got 4 minutes.
Yeah, I won't. Yeah, I will let you go. You don't need to see me for 4 minutes. So have a good rest, recharge, do what you need to, and we'll see you back here at 9 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
you